do it.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining. I'm Adam Bluhm, Agents with Adam.
Hello, everybody, and I'm Patrick Freeman in AI Pat.
Yeah, man. Thanks for joining, Pat. And, Patrick and I met over LinkedIn, and we're really here to talk about our military service, how we broke into big tech, and our journey to help you. So, this is live. Feel free to ask questions. This is about you. We're going to provide resources at the end. We're going to share some stories and pictures. So please feel free to just join in the conversation. We're just excited to share our stories to help fellow veterans out get into the world of big tech. Pat, what do you think?
Yeah, like you said, yeah, feel free. This is about you. It's not so much about us, but we want to share our stories in hopes that it helps you. So, yeah, super excited to be here today.
Yeah. So, Patrick, how did you, what was your military cert? Where did your military journey start?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, my military journey started around when I was 19. I was working a job after high school. I didn't really like that job. I was limited on options at the time. So, I decided to take a leap and join the Marine Corps. I went in as an open contract. And my MOS ended up being 3531, which was a motor transportation operator. And you can think of it as like a tactical truck driver. So it's like delivering items from point A to point B, whether that be supplies for troops, um, equipment, weapons, whatever was needed from a training perspective. And yeah, that's how I got started in the military, and yeah, it was a new challenge for me, leaving the area I grew up around, the area I was most familiar with, and throughout that journey, I got started, learning how to do my military occupational, especially at first. Went through training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, but before then, when I went to boot camp, I was in Paris Island, which was a brand new place I haven't been before, and yeah, it was super exciting, super challenging, and learned a lot along the way, and it really helped shape my career, from a career perspective, and really learn how to transition. It really helped me lay the foundation for my career after the military as well. Learned a lot of key skills from leadership to getting things done to working with others, teamwork, collaboration, really just helped shape my career as an overall perspective. And yeah, it was super exciting for me. I'll never forget my military service. And in there, I learned a lot about technology as I went along, even though that wasn't my primary job when I was in the military. But I really got a lot of good experience from a technology perspective by collaborating and networking with other military folks who were in the field I wanted to be in long term, and that really helped me along the way. I went into tech a little later throughout my career, but I was able to hit the ground running. Thanks to the military, really helped shape my career from from an IT perspective, as well as getting into more sophisticated technologies such as AI and working on some of those use cases with AI machine learning. Yeah, it was a really good experience overall, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. How
It's
about
fun.
you?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that you went into like basically open general, right? Like that's exactly what I did too. I went in the Air Force, like I don't know what I want to do.
Yeah, yeah.
I just knew that I wanted to join the military, get out of the situation. I joined from Oregon, and I was like, I'll do put me in coach, I'll do whatever, right? And I got lucky, and they put me into IT. And man, the Marines, that is such a badass thing that you did. I don't know, man. Like I was part of the Chair Force Mafia, and you did the Crucible. How was that? Was that really challenging? The Crucible?
Yeah. Yeah, it was one of the most challenging things I've done in my life, Adam. Boot camp was 3 months. The Crucible was a week long exercise. My feet still hurt to this day. From that, the last hike that or hump that we did there, and it really taught me how to keep going, push forward there. In terms of when things get hard, and I was just able to remain, develop that mental strength from the military and that training. Yeah, it really helped, again, shaped, my career throughout, the whole time there. So yeah, I really
You know,
loved it.
I agree with you. I don't think I'd be the person. Actually, I know I wouldn't be the person I am today with that resiliency and the attitude of service before self. Really going for something bigger than yourself. Whether that is,
Yeah,
the
exactly.
military service or like I know for you, for me in particular, like I love working for companies that are focused on the mission, focus on helping
But yeah.
our national security mission and things like that. Nothing wrong with the commercial side at all, but um, I like having a purpose. If so, for me, the Air Force side of it, I joined from Oregon. I went in, I was open general, got into IT, and then I ultimately ended up at Scott Air Force Base in Illinois.
Oh.
And yeah, that was so intimidating because I got, assigned to the Tanker Airlift Control Center, which is like it was weird because it was a skiff, but back then, because
Mhm.
cell phones didn't have cameras on them, we could take our cell phones in the skiff.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, right? Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Uh, but it was intimidating because here I was like a, at the time, when I got to Sky Force Base, I was like E2, and I was surrounded by colonels and, generals because Scott Air Force Base has a lot of generals there for a typical military base. But it was good because I got some mentors. I got this lieutenant colonel as a mentor, and he gave me some really great advice. He told me things like, "Adam, the world is what you make of it, um, and network. Network with people, um, save your
Mhm.
money, don't blow it all on stupid stuff." I didn't exactly listen to that as much as I should have, but that really led that networking aspect really led to getting landing my first contracting job, which was a defense contracting job that led to me working in the intelligence community. But backing up to that military service, I got super lucky because I was part of a communication squadron in the Air Force, and most of us only had secret clearances, but I was
Mhm.
able to get my clearance upgraded thanks to that special unit I was a part of. And I got to
Mhm.
deploy to Qatar, to Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, and I was in the Combined Air and Operations Center, and that's where I met this lieutenant colonel. I'm still friends with him to this day. Lieutenant Colonel Dias is his name, and he owns a company. And he blew my mind, Pat, because he had the spreadsheet of like if he does this with his career versus this, he mapped out like every major career decision and what that
Oh,
could
wow.
lead to.
I
And
like
so
that.
he worked, yeah, yeah. So he worked backwards from where does he want to go with his career? And he gave me advice I still use to this day is basically you need to be the CEO of your own career.
Wow.
Um,
That's
but it,
powerful.
yeah, it's so powerful. And so, that helped me gain some confidence a little bit about like, okay, you know, all I knew was desktop support in the Air Force. That's all I was trained to do.
Mhm.
But I really wanted to get into servers and things like that because at the time, servers and Linux and stuff like that was all the rage.
Oh, yeah.
Um, yeah, like, oh, if you knew Exchange or if you knew Microsoft Server or if you knew Linux, like that was a big deal. And so I got my first contracting job at NGA, working for a company called NJVC, and I started off in desktop support. Um, But, I'll pause there, like, how what and by the way, how I broke into that role, going from all I had was CompTIA, Security Plus at the time, um, but it was the networking. I networked with a government employee who
Yes.
had a brother that worked as a contractor at this agency, this federal contractor, and it was through my hard work and also networking with that person over the course of, like, a year or so in my role when I was an airman, that really led to that door being opened.
Mm.
And I got a recommendation. I remember getting the interview, and I got the job, and it was for 55,000 a year at the time. And I was like, dude, that's so much more money than I was making as an airman.
Yeah, you gotta
That
start somewhere though, right?
Right, this was back in 2007, and it, like, blew my mind, but this just goes to show you that, like, networking, that was an early lesson as well. Is like, man, you gotta communicate, you gotta talk to people, you can't just focus on the technical skills, you gotta
Yeah.
network. But how did you break into your first role?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was initially when I joined the military, I wasn't planning to stay in long term, but I just things changed along the way. I spent most of my time overseas in the third MEF, which was in Okinawa, Japan. So my first tour was in Okinawa, Japan, and they are similar like to you. I met a mentor. I was working in the command element, the G4, and I had a lieutenant colonel too. He pulled me aside. He said, "What's your plan? What's your career plan?" And then I started thinking about staying in the military a little longer. I wanted to transition to become an officer, so I started planning out that career path. And my mentor at the time, like you said, mentors, I can't touch on that or iterate that enough. It's very important. Everybody needs a mentor, no matter what stage you are in your career. And he told me to come up with a plan A, plan B, plan C. And from there I just started executing. And throughout I always had a passion for tech, as when I was a kid. So I started learning more about tech while I was in. Met some folks, just networking, talking to people who were doing tech, and they always told me get a clearance, or some of them were even telling me like they got their clearance, they're getting out after 4 years. So that really inspired me. So when I went to my next duty station, I ended up putting in the paperwork to transition to become like it was an information assurance MOS. I don't think that's around anymore. I don't hear that much about information assurance as a role, but that was the career path I was going to transition to because I was really super interested in cybersecurity, and that helped me actually get my TS clearance. And that really helped me get my foot in the door, made me a lot more marketable since I didn't really have the background for IT per se. But in my shop where we worked, I was the go-to resource for any type of desktop support issues. So if my captain had an issue, my lieutenant had an issue, my master sergeant had an issue, they always called me to kind of provide that desktop support. And then I ended up being like the main point of contact for all of our information assurance programs across our unit for my section, and that really helped me get some insights. And then started networking. It was a little bit hard to network overseas because, like back then, I didn't really have social media wasn't that popular. I don't think LinkedIn was around, and I ended up just going to taking advantage of all the military resources that were available to me. So things like that would help you with your resume, would help you with how to apply for jobs. And then I came across a small defense contractor at the time, or a medium-sized defense contractor at the time, called Intelligent Decisions. They've later got acquired, and the hiring manager at the time, come to find out, we had a lot in common, and we just sort of connected. Throughout our conversation, it wasn't even so much about tech. We just started talking about, the Marine Corps, life, and those things in general. And then just like you, my first, contract was with the NGA, and,
Oh, really, was it?
yeah,
That's
yeah,
amazing. What
you
what
can't.
what 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 part of NGA, I mean, what part of NGA did you work? 'Cause I worked in the desktop support team initially, and I moved quite a bit, once I was in, but, where were you at in the NGA sphere, in terms of IT?
Yeah, I started at the bottom there. I was in the hardware installation side, so a lot of racking and stacking, a
Yeah.
lot of, desktops sort of support, is setting up the desktop. I was at the new campus east, that they built out, so it was, like, really at the initial stages of that. I didn't stick around there too long, but yeah, I got in at the desktop support installation, learned a lot about cabling. I was able to apply some of those skills I learned in the Marine Corps around like just attention to detail. So all my
Yeah.
all my desktop setups were tight, all my cable wraps were there. I made sure it looked immaculate. And then, as new folks came on board, I tried to set that standard as well, or establish that standard with them so that, everything looks good. That really helped me out through my that was another skill I gained from the Marine Corps, while I was in. If it looks good, it smells good, in terms of like every Thursday we used to have field day, cleaning our rooms, and I never had a problem because my room was always clean, and I applied those same concepts to my IT career when I got out. I made sure that I stuck to, adopted attention to detail in everything I do, make sure it's good to go. And yeah, that's kind of where I got my foot in the door at the server installation, the hardware installation level, tier one.
That's it's funny you mentioned that because I was in the on the desktop support team, and I had to, initially set up desktops, and we were transitioning. This is back in 2007. We were
Hmm.
transitioning to Windows XP. By 2007, transitioning to Windows XP. And not only that, going from BNC connectors to fiber. And I was like, dude, how are they so far behind? And I was actually in St. Louis. I wasn't at NCE, but I was in the St. Louis old campus, which now, because it's actually a 150-year-old campus
Oh
or so.
wow.
Yeah, it's an old armory during the Civil War era, but now they have the new Campus West. But uh, yeah, and I was like, I quickly realized, like, yeah, I want to do something more than this. But you're right, like the attention to detail really mattered a lot. I got into cybersecurity as well. I took a big interest. I learned about like Backtrack Linux, which is now Kali Linux and things like
Oh
that.
yeah.
And I started getting into the Linux world. So my next job was like I got a $5,000 pay increase to go do cybersecurity, more like antivirus type of like a team. Did that for a little bit, and then I realized, I don't know, it's kind of boring because it's like a lot of like logs. And so
Mhm.
I worked my tail off to learn Unix, Solaris Unix, which ultimately got me on the server team to learn Red Hat. And that's where I fell in love with Linux and Red Hat. And that was my next big certification was the RHCSA, Red Hat's administrator cert, and that was really hard for me to get initially back in the day.
Oh
Hey,
yeah.
we didn't have a lot of great resources back then. No chat GPTs to help us out.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. But man, that was such a rewarding experience. But like going back to what you said, Pat, like how
Mhm.
you connected with the hiring manager, talked about military service. I think for those that watch this that are veterans or going to be veterans pretty soon here, like, that is such an important thing, right? Network, but also just connect with people, right? This is for your career, it's much bit more about less about the tech, less about the certifications. It's about purpose. It's about connecting with people um, on a deeper level and sharing those experiences because ultimately people want to work with people they get along with and can relate to, um, as well as, you're able to do the job. But
Yeah,
uh,
exactly.
and I connect with my first hiring manager too in that way. Is like, we hit it off when we nerded out about some things and the whole Air Force experience. So uh yeah, it's great advice. And I
Yeah.
think for me, my next the career move, so I was just kind of like going from, one defense contracting job to another, went from NJVC to BAE systems and back to NJVC again. And I was like, okay, I need to take my career to the next level. I really wanted to get into big tech. It was actually my dream to get into Red Hat. Um, at the time, this was like 2011, and I got that Red Hat cert. I was on the server team, and I learned so much. And I feel like that was my next step in my career, going from just a basic IT guy to, okay, now I'm a Linux server admin, and that's when I started to really like dive deep into the craft of being an IT professional as opposed to just being reactive. I started being more proactive in my training and in, becoming an expert. How about you?
Yeah, just taking a couple steps back here for me. So I started doing a lot of self learning before I got out of the Marine Corps. So I tried to pursue certifications like CompTIA, A plus, security. I don't think Security Plus was around back then, But I didn't pass the exam the first time I took it, and that taught me a valuable lesson. I didn't give up either, so I did end up getting a CompTIA or multiple CompTIA certs. But while I was in the Marine Corps, I started doing like side projects. I had a couple of blogs with a couple of buddies. We had a sports blog. That
Oh,
really
that's
taught me
cool.
a lot about managing websites, website performance. I was working with like AWS S3 to cache our images.
Dang, you work with
So
AWS 3 back then?
back then, yes,
That's
yes,
impressive, man. Yeah,
yes.
kudos.
So I'm a AWS 3 OG there, and we go way back. And that was like my sort of my first experience with AWS. We're doing like the websites were based off of WordPress. We didn't really have it was just me and him. So he was like the writer. I was sort of like a co-writer, but I sort of ran the infrastructure. When we did like hosted events, I had to learn a lot of new skills, to kind of adapt on the fly there, develop things like that I never developed before, such as like widgets. And then, once I got into tech, I got my foot in the door. I started talking to other people, and that's another thing I want to relay here is like communication is utterly important. Being able to connect with people, relationships, and as I learned things as I went along, that's when I transitioned into a tier two role, like shortly after I got out of the military. So I spent like 5 months on my first contract. It was kind of coming to an end. It was kind of shaky, but then I went to another contract, and then come to find out the day I showed up, I walked into a meeting and they were like, "We got some good news and we got some bad news." The good news or the bad news is we lost a recompete. So immediately right away, I was only there for 3 months. But as I was there, I tried to make the best of it. I learned I was working with we were using Windows XP at the time as well, or at least we were supporting that from a system administration perspective. And there were a slew of issues. And then in addition to that, one of the issues, it was kind of like, just I guess destiny. Like as I was, trying to learn technology, my laptop kept crashing every week, and I got tired of the blue screen of death. And I started talking to some of my tech buddies, and that's when they recommended I try out Ubuntu. And that's when I kind of get out in Ubuntu, started, and that was kind of my entry into Linux there from a self-learning perspective. But then on the job, after my second job, I was there for like 3 months because the contract was over, and I didn't see any good options sticking around with the new prime. So then I took on a new role, which kind of seemed like a step back, but it was also a step forward. And I learned a very important lesson talking to one of the hiring managers. I didn't really like the title because it was tier one, but that hiring manager at the time, he said, "Titles are just titles." And that
Yeah.
really stuck with me. And then I had the opportunity to not only work with to do tier one, but I got the opportunity to do tier one support for a Linux application, a very important Linux application. I can't say what it is, but um yeah, and that was kind of like how I got into Linux a little bit. And then I got a lot of certifications. While I was at that job, they paid for a lot of my certifications and trainings. I got my certified ethical hacker. I got
Oh,
my
dang.
CIA
I
Security Plus.
I studied a lot for that certified ethical hacker. I was gonna eventually get that, but I just
Mhm.
went down the Red Hat rabbit hole. I was trying to go for that engineering cert before, VMware picked me up as a teaser to when we talk about the big tech breakthrough. But, you said something, Pat, like,
Mhm.
man, like, the whole, like, titles don't matter. And I used to hear that as well, and initially that frustrated me because in defense contracting, titles is how you got paid, right? I mean, it still is, but it was like, "Oh, you have to be a senior or you have to be a whatever," right? Like, that's how you got paid in defense contracting. And by the way, one of the lessons learned in defense contracting was that contracts come and go, and if you gotta look at where the money is, from your career as a veteran in tech. If you're a
Yeah.
defense contractor, if you think about it, right, it's all about butts in a seat. The company that hired
Yeah.
you as for a defense contractor, they're getting paid for, deliverables, based off a period of performance, and they're getting an X amount, like, let's say, I don't know, $500,000 for a person in that seat, and that means there is a very real ceiling. It doesn't matter what your impact is in that role. You could be the second coming of tech. You're not going to get paid more money. And so, that was something that I kept on hitting a wall on in defense contracting. But going back to the comment about title's not everything. It took me longer than you, I think, to realize that that title is not everything, because if you look at some, just as a quick aside, I
Mhm.
see some people at Anthropic, some friends that have the title of solutions architect, just solutions architect. And here I am as a principal architect, but they're making way more money, having a big impact as well. Even though their title is not senior or principal or whatever, it doesn't matter. What matters is your impact and what you bring to the table, and also where you're working at too. This is why big tech's so important. But um, yeah, I also, just really quick,
Yeah.
Pat, I was hoping to. I forgot to do this. I wanted to bring up some of your military pictures, if that's okay.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely.
because we forgot to bring this up, for those interested. Like, Pat, do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, so that's a military picture of me when I was at 3rd MEF MHG, which is a MEF headquarters group. I'm down here on the left. You can see me in the corner kneeling there. And yeah, during that period, I was just transitioning into sort of a leadership or a supervisory role there. So it was a huge responsibility, going back to, touching on that title thing. Even though I didn't have the title of, let's say, a staff NCO, we actually didn't have any around. So I had to do evaluations for pretty much all those Marines that you see there. So, I had 30 or 40 Marines that I was supervising at the time, and yeah, we were just, we were very cohesive. We were rocking and rolling. We did a lot of awesome things. Supported a lot of cool real world missions there. When things went down in the Pacific, and yeah, that was like, I forget what year that was, but it had to be at least maybe 2006, 2007. So yeah, it's a little old there. And that vehicle you see in the background, that is a what we call a 7-ton. It's a big truck, and yeah, it was pretty one of the coolest trucks to be in while we were there. Yeah,
Did
it's a little
Did you have
truck.
to get a special license for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was actually, even though I had a primary MOS, I also had a secondary MOS, which
Oh,
was
really?
licensing examiner. So I was also the licensing examiner for that unit, and also my subsequent unit. So yeah, I trained. You got to get a license on that truck from the schoolhouse. You usually get licensed on that from the schoolhouse if 3531 is your MOS. But we also had other MOSs within the Marine Corps that needed to get their license. So yeah, anybody who didn't go to the schoolhouse to get their license for that truck, we would train them there on site. We had 7 tons, we had Humvees, we had up armored Humvees. Those were all like different license, different courses, because those were things like there's certain things you had to know, because there was slight differences between the vehicles, like such as armor, if they were up armored. We also had minesweepers, because
Dang.
there were a lot of IEDs out there. So folks going down range, they had to be trained on how to utilize the minesweeping equipment. So yeah, we definitely had to get training, and we were always fine tuning our training, and always training and stuff as well.
Well, one of the craziest experience I had when I was in the Air Force. So this is me in the Air Force, a cheesy picture. That was that LUD.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I was trying to be cool. Was that so I was a tech, so I was a 3 alpha, which 3 alpha was normally reserved for like information management, which is usually like a glorified secretary. But because of where I was and the clearance and all that stuff, I was more of a 3C, which at the time was more about servers and technology and computers. So I didn't do any of the traditional information management stuff. I did all tech. And, but one of the coolest things, I got to learn how to drive a Humvee and do evasive convoy stuff. So I got to train with the Army, even though I never used that training. Um, but I remember having to get a special license for the Humvee. And man, the Humvee was like a pain in the butt to drive because those are old school Humvees. And, you know, this just reminds me, Pat, of like going back to like having a purpose, being focused on like the mission for tech. Like you're a veteran. I'm a veteran. For those watching, you're a veteran too. And what drove you to join the military? Use that to drive you in your career to find that purpose. For me, when I was at LUD, I saw a lot of Humvees coming back damaged and blown up to Qatar and LUD, and there was this big fight to up armor those Humvees, downrange, and
Mhm.
there wasn't, the budget wasn't there and all this stuff. And meanwhile, we're spending $800 on chairs working in tents. And I'm just like, what? This is stupid. This inefficiency of spending and all
Yeah,
that stuff. And so, that's been a personal thing of mine of like, I want to get from a tech perspective, especially now in AI, if you look at like Palantir, if you look at Anthropic and AWS and all these big tech companies, a lot of them are actually focused on the mission and about really changing the game for national security and doing more with less with technology. So that's been kind of my personal thing.
more or less,
Um,
yeah.
you know what I mean? We have one more military picture here. Like, do you want to talk about this one too?
Oh, yeah, so, yeah, this is when I was, performing as the 3rd MEF color sergeant. Funny story here, I was given a few days heads up about this. I was and that's another thing I wanna touch on. So, like, throughout my time in the military, one thing that helped me was I never turned down the opportunity for a challenge or an opportunity to learn something new. So there wasn't any billet with inside my shop that I didn't know, and that really helped me be more viable, but also make more of an impact. This was one of those roles. So me and those group of Marines you see right there, we were all given less than a week to prepare for the Marine Corps ball. And I was the color sergeant there. So it was exciting role, exciting times, a lot of pressure. I had to operate under pressure, had to learn a lot of different movements, how to facilitate, everything during the Marine Corps ball there. And yeah, I was that's a picture of me being the 3rd MEF color sergeant for my unit there.
That is awesome. This is one of my biggest regrets. By the way, it was my dream to become a military officer. I just never did it because I was so focused on my tech career. But one of the worst pieces of advice that I got was by a fellow airman when I right before I joined. He was already in, and he told me, he said, "Be neutral. Don't volunteer. Don't raise your hand. Be quiet in basic training and in your career, and you'll make it. You will survive." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool, okay." So, hindsight, that was terrible advice, because it took me longer than other folks like yourself to get that leadership experience, to get that, um, you know, uh, put me in, coach attitude. Because when I first joined the military, and I was just like, okay, I'm not going to volunteer for color guard. I'm not going to volunteer for the rope. I'm not going to volunteer for any of this stuff. I'm just going to be, invisible. And man, I think, if you're in the military now, or you're in, a veteran and you're getting into tech or you're in tech already,
Mhm.
if you're not already, listen to Pat's advice there. And I would just say, start it immediately, volunteer for stuff. Don't be afraid to raise your hand. Don't be afraid to try new things or, take on new challenges, because that's ultimately how you grow. And that's how you become more valuable to, big tech employers as well. As a quick, super quick story here, you don't have to be in the military to do this too, but there's a guy, and I'm mentoring. He's a intern at Hidden Layer and also at AWS. His name's Will, and he blows my mind. He's only 20 years old,
Oh, wow.
but he has already interned at AWS, Hidden Layer, some other, Mantech, soon to be FBI. He already has a job lined up with Palantir, and he's only 20 years old. He's already spoken in front of 500 people.
Wow.
He volunteers, he helps people. He's already built websites and built like, different apps. Like, he's just diving in nonstop, and he's networking. When he was at AWS, he was like, I'm going to go talk to the VP. He didn't
Wow.
care. He didn't care that he was an intern. Most interns are scared to
Yeah.
volunteer, scared to put their necks out there. But Will, you, for example, you guys are shining examples of what right looks like. Doesn't matter where you are in your career, if you're still in the military or after, if you're not already doing that, taking on those challenges, do it. Like, start now.
Yeah, and I think I know who you're talking about now that you mention it. But yeah, I've always admired that guy. I think he seems like a real go-getter, and I think he's going to go very far throughout his career. And one of the and volunteering or just getting outside your comfort zone is another, thing I would recommend sometimes if you wanna grow. I know it's not necessarily meant for everybody. It's very challenging, it can be very stressful, but if you wanna grow, you gotta get outside your comfort zone. That's the only way you're gonna grow, from what I've seen and from my experience. You can't keep doing the same thing, expecting the same results. So, yeah, just wanna hit on that a little bit.
Yeah, man, that's such great advice. So, in this section of the podcast here, I think some big key takeaways is go for challenges, right? Raise your hand, like you going in the crucible, right? You put yourself out there. I put myself out there joining the Air Force. You listening, if you're a veteran or in the military still, you already raised your hand to do something really challenging. So why stop there? Like, keep on doing that because you'll be surprised 5, 10 years down the road where you end up. Um, and for
Yeah.
me, breaking into big tech, I'm sure for you too, Pat, like that was just the next evolution of taking on new challenges. Like, there's that saying, I think you probably heard it too, Pat. I heard it when I was in the military. It's like, oh, that general, he puts his pants on the same way as you do.
Oh, yeah, I
And
heard that one,
right?
definitely.
But
Yeah.
it's true, it's true, like, these big tech success people, these people in big tech that are super successful, at the big AI labs or big cloud companies or whatever, yes, they're admirable and amazing, but they put their pants on the same way that you do. What's the difference between them and you? It's just effort, it's networking, it's, taking on those new challenges, and also, I think, ruthlessly prioritizing what's important, to get to where you wanna go. So you gotta work backwards from there. But anyway,
Oh,
it's a
yeah, and I
j
just want to say one thing too, like, when you said ruthlessly prioritizing, like, having a plan, coming up with those different plans. Just wanna reiterate that. I know I touched on it a little earlier, but, having a plan, but not and a plan is only as good as if you execute. So, the first step into execution, in my opinion, is make sure you write it down, even if it's on paper, in a Google Doc, have a plan and execute.
oh, that's so great, yeah, 'cause, I did not do that early on in my career either because I was still, like, growing and learning from that initial experience of just being invisible. Because I thought early in my career that all that mattered was tech skills. All that mattered was that. And I got frustrated because I knew people that didn't know as much as me, at least I thought, from a technical perspective, that were going much faster in their career, even in defense contracting. But the difference was they took on the hard challenges. They had a bigger impact. They networked. They had a plan, to your point. I didn't have a plan. My plan was in my head, and that wasn't good enough. So I was hoping, Pat, we could talk about the mid career right before we break into big tech. We had the early career. I got into Linux. I learned Solaris. I got in the Red Hat, got that Red Hat certified administrator. That was a big unlock for me when I started going for the big vendor certifications. Because I got CompTIA certified and all that stuff, but that didn't, you have to get, if you're going to work in defense contracting or the defense world at all, you have to
Mhm.
have Security Plus at least.
Oh, yes.
Um,
Standard.
I but, it was going for those vendor certs that were hot in the moment, which at the time, the Red Hat ones were super hot. VMware certs were super hot. That's what kind of unlocked my mental model
Mhm.
of what I should focus on from a technology perspective, and so I ended up getting promoted to a senior Linux administrator or engineer rather, at NGA. And
Oh, wow.
and this was my moment, to your point, Pat, like you said, you started experimenting with blogs and all this stuff. I finally stopped following the invisible script of just do your job and attention to detail, do it really well, to got started being creative. What was I interested in? So I started buying servers for my house. I started experimenting with VMware. I started doing experimenting with Backtrack or Kali Linux as it's known now. But I also started teaching myself Python. Um, I remember, one of the coolest like working on projects because here's the thing: when you interview for big tech, and I think you'll probably agree with this, Pat,
Mhm.
is being able to tell compelling stories to the recruiting team, to the hiring manager, to your team that you're interviewing for about impact and things you've actually done. They want to see that passion. They want to see that you've thought outside the box. And so one of the first outside the box things I personally did was not only did I teach myself Python for scripting cert purposes, but I like how do I make a GUI? And so I remember one of the coolest projects I did. Again, I self-taught myself. I remember being in the skiff and I was on some Red Hat servers, and I taught myself Python. I said, "How do I turn this script into a graphical user interface?" And so I taught myself X Windows and all this stuff, and I remember being so proud of like, "Oh, man, this is so cool. I did this." And then that led to the next thing for me, which was I started learning Hadoop, and I learned big data, and I built a proof of concept without anybody asking me, and I was able to pitch that to government leaders. Now, at the time, they didn't think big data was a big deal, but I knew differently. Which I'll tease this, and I won't go to you, Pat. But that me doing that was actually a big reason I was able to break into big tech with VMware initially. But before I get into that, what was your kind of mid career moment there before you got into big tech?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, it was like kind of similar there. So I was always curious. I live, sleep, and eat and breathe technology. So I was always tinkering around with stuff after work. Paying attention to trends. I used to always get the latest copies of Linux Admin magazine and
Oh yeah,
different like, technology magazines out there. And that's when I started as I gained different skills, just, volunteering for different things over, throughout my early career, that helped me develop a broader picture. And then, and always, I was always learning new things. And then that's what really helped catapult my career, I want to say, because I started being ahead of the curve. So like in around 2014, 2015-ish time, I started working with containers. Back then,
dang,
LXC was like the most popular or the like very first, I want to say, or one of the first popular contain or mainstream container applications out there. And then Docker came along. I was working for a Veterans Affairs customer at the time, and LXC was approved, but Docker wasn't. So that didn't stop me there. So I still got some experience with Docker. And as we started, sort of this place I was working at was they were kind of on the bleeding edge or on the edge, but if not the bleeding edge of technology. And that really and I had, I had developed a relationship with someone and, it goes back to communication, being able to talk to people, get outside your comfort zone. And, we started when we were using containers, we ran into some challenges around not only scalability, but managing all these different containers. And then that's when Kubernetes came along, but it wasn't quite there yet in the early days. And always being forward looking, it kind of helped me, I want to say, break into big tech. When I was in those interviews and those talking to the hiring managers, recruiters, they would hear these things. And, that really, I want to say that was the pivotal thing or the key thing that helped accelerate my career, being able to not only talk about the things that people are currently doing, but the things looking towards the future and talking to folks about the things, the direction of where things are going. And like you, I got some exposure to Hadoop, and I was really just solving challenges or working on teams that were, that allowed us, that a certain level of innovation to be able to solve some of these challenges. And that's what really helped me break into big tech, being forward looking, being a jack of all trades, sort of say. So, when you know more than just one thing, let's say programming, you're just kind of limited to programming. But if you know infrastructure, if you know networking, if you know automation, that makes you much more valuable. You're able to make much more of an impact, and you're able to ask questions, raise concerns, which helps keep projects on track, but also reduce risk as you're going along as well. So, yeah, I would say the biggest thing that helped me get into big tech was tinkering, learning things outside of work, continuously studying for certifications. I got my RHCSA as well around 2015, right during the time when CentOS 7 or RHEL 7 came out. So there was
That
a
was a big deal. That was a
yeah, that
big
was
deal.
sort of a big deal, and that really helped me. And that's kind of how I got into, big tech. And I went from government contracting to commercial side. And my first commercial stint was at Comcast. So yeah, they were doing a lot of cool things there. And yeah, that's what really helped me break into big tech, I would say, being forward looking and
I wanna touch on something you said too, like, I thought this was so profound, like, you know, most of most of the skills and, the way I've been able to have impact in my role to then help me grow and also get the next big job
Mhm.
has been, to your point, tinkering outside of work. Like, I think, this really hones in on something that I you know, I was guilty of this early in my career, and I know so many people are too. Uh, they think that, "Oh, I'm not gonna learn this new skill unless I get paid for training. Oh, my
Uh-huh.
company is not training me on that. I'm not gonna learn it." Well, if you wanna grow, if you wanna break into big tech, you have to be a self-starter and learn and be curious. You have to do that outside of work, full stop. Like, this is a nonstop learning. And big tech expects that. Big tech 100% expects you to be the person that's like, I'm always learning 24/7. Not literally 24/7, but you're always looking around the corner. You're always tinkering. Um, and so I evolved into that myself too. Like, like you working with Kubernetes so early, that's amazing, and Docker and stuff like that. I didn't really get into the containerization, I think, until 2019, 2020. Because I was so focused on VMware at the time. But, um, it's for me, like just to talk about it too. Um, I I have over 50 certifications
Oh,
in
wow.
my career so far, spanning from VMware, Red Hat, security, AWS, all sorts of things. But no one cares. I mean, people care, but they don't care. What really matters is what kind of stories, what kind of impact do you have? Are you a outside the box thinker? Are you learning? Are you always learning and and curious? Are you uh, um, always trying new things? Um, but I got to hats off to you, man, because like Kubernetes was so rough back then, even 2018, 2019 timeframe. But um, I was really into predictive analytics and Hadoop, and it was those stories. So I'll talk about that really quick. I wanna hear your story too, how you got into big tech and, like you said, Comcast. For me at VMware, I started to have a presence on LinkedIn. So, being the CEO of your own career, right? Like, start taking control of your career. Don't wait for people to promote you. Don't wait for people to find you or just give you something, right? Like, you gotta be in charge. And so, when I started to, like, experiment with Hadoop, experiment with proof of concepts, showing additional value beyond my job description, and then making that known. I created a WordPress website about lessons learned on Hadoop. Those things actually led to a VMware recruiter back in 2015 reaching out to me and saying, "Hey, would you like to work for VMware?" I was
Oh,
like,
that's awesome.
"No, yes." And so, because I was still a defense contractor at the time, and I had a goal of like breaking into six figures by the time I hit 30 years old. And funny enough, VMware did that for me.
Oh, wow.
Um, it was like a goal of mine because six figures back then used to mean a lot. Like 100,000 a year. It still means a lot. Don't get me wrong, but it's like it's not what it used to be. But
Yes.
inflation and all. But when I interviewed for the VMware role, I had no VMware certifications, zero. I had some vCenter experience, but most of my knowledge and expertise was on Red Hat and Hadoop. But VMware was starting to get into the Linux game with starting to get into the uh big data game. They had a product at the time around that. And me being able to tell that story meant that I was a cultural fit. And oftentimes big tech companies, they care about that cultural fit. And what culture often means is, can we get along with you? But more important, like I guess maybe even more importantly of that is, are you the kind of person that's going to be a self-starter? Are you the kind of person that's going to take the initiative or not? Because what we don't want to just hire someone that just clocks in, clocks out. That's what big tech, they don't have time for that game.
Oh yeah,
Um,
for sure.
right. And so when I went through the interview process, I'll never forget it. I'm still friends with the people that hired me. One with his name's Jay Rue. He ended up being my manager, but he was a senior consultant at the time. I went to Scott Air Force Base, had lunch, we had an interview, and we just talked. And we just talked about stories about what I've done, right? And that ultimately led to me getting hired on as a senior consultant in professional services at VMware, and my pay went way up. And this was my first four-way for whatever the word is into big tech. And you know, it was hard at first because it was so much faster than defense contracting. So
Oh
much
yeah,
faster.
different, totally
So
different for me too.
Pat, do you want to talk about like your first big tech job? I think you said Comcast, right?
Yeah. So, yes, got started at Comcast. I was with a team that had been around for a while. So a lot of folks had been there 10, 15 years. A lot of ex AOLers. So, they bought over, AOL was kind of, doing a lot of hot and cool things back in the day. So, I got to learn a lot from them as well. And yeah, when I got into Comcast, one of my first sort of projects that I worked on was a project called Elk as a Service.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was like an internal Elk as a Service offering. So we were supporting product teams, and my manager slash director at the time, they had like a POC going, but there were a lot of gaps. It wasn't secure. It was running on old operating systems. So I kind of set the vision there, took it from pretty much concept to production, and grew it from zero teams to like over 40 40 internal product teams in less than a year. It was super challenging, super exciting. Got to collaborate with a lot of my teammates. Got to learn new tools at the time, which was like Terraform. Got deeper into AWS
Yeah.
and the whole value prop. And that was another thing. So it wasn't just learning about like when I was at like working for like defense contractors, it was more so just delivering, but when I got on the commercial side, it was more so of the big picture. Also, that's where I learned about like value proposition, business cases, getting that. I didn't have any prior experience with that, but I just sort of learned and adapted along the way. And, that was like a huge opportunity for me to be able to take something from concept to production, but also sort of run it as it's like you can imagine, like, almost like your own little business within a company. Even, the only difference was
Yeah.
I wasn't, getting paid commission for each project we onboarded, but, I did learn a lot about different use cases that apply to, like, telecommunications. So, like, I got to work on, like, edge use cases. I got to work on, like big data use cases, learn a lot about like standards. And this really helped, further shape my career as I got more senior throughout my career, being able to, address some of those challenges like security, optimization, cost optimization, um, automation, making things easier. And like I said, I was sort of like running a mini business within a company, and it's such a that was such a pivotal moment for me throughout my career because it just taught me a lot overall. I got to gain a lot of new skills. So, and another thing I want to touch on just real quick. So we're talking about tech, but I also want to mention these soft skills are important too.
Oh,
Knowing
yeah.
how to collaborate, communication. Bad news doesn't get better with time. If something isn't going right, you don't want to wait to the end of the sprint or the the end of a project or the major release to let folks know. You want to make sure you always have those lines of communications open. So that's why I was able to, further grow my soft skills as well in terms of communication and stuff like that, and also develop new skills. So not only did I work with Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana, I was working with Hadoop, which was a super huge challenge when I was at Comcast. Got to learn a little bit about Splunk, and then also got to learn about machine learning. New tech. That was totally new technology to me. All those different applications that I mentioned, we were running those as a service or providing those as a service to teams internally. So there was a lot of like visibility. And that's another thing I want to touch on too. Make sure, if you want to go place in your career, you don't want to spend time working on stuff nobody cares about. That could be a huge career killer. That's not going to help your promotion. You want to work on stuff that has impact, has value, that and also has the executive sort of level sponsorship or buy-in, if you will. And that really helped me, kind of transition into my sort of next phase of my career, which was tech sales. I got into tech sales at Red Hat, and yeah, and I'll pause there. That was pretty much, how I, just kept things going from a skills perspective, but also learned new skills and adapted along the way there.
Yeah, so it sounds like Comcast was like a really big growth area for you.
Absolutely, absolutely. It was a tremendous opportunity. I'm super grateful for that opportunity. Got to meet a lot of folks. I worked with folks here. I'm located in Virginia, but we had an office in Virginia. We had an office in Philly. The main office was in Philadelphia, so I got to work with those teams, see how other teams were doing things, and really solve some of those challenges that we're having. Because I like to say, so a lot of folks like to do what I call, or what people say, resume driven development, where they're just tinkering with stuff. And, you know, I've seen applications that had every tool you can imagine. They had multiple databases. They had Postgres. They had Mongo. They had every automation tool out there,
Yeah.
Ansible, Puppet, Chef. And, it's really about, one of the problems we were solving with Elk as a service was enabling those service teams to focus on their core competencies. They were hired for a reason, which was not to do Elk. They were hired to develop software, whether that be, and some of the software was mission critical. Just touching on some of the things you mentioned around mission critical earlier, and that's what really drove me to see the vision there, and it was definitely a valuable skill, from a career perspective to have there. So yeah.
One thing you mentioned there, that you mentioned a lot of great points there, but I think another big takeaway that it took me a long time to learn was I was in professional services for about 10 years, 9, 10 years, and then I went into tech sales. But one thing that tech sales really made me realize is like, as a tech nerd, as a veteran tech nerd like yourself, I often got stuck in technology for technology's sake. And, oftentimes we try to say, no, VMware or this product or this tech stack is the best because it's technically the best. And then you get frustrated when you don't get buy in from executives or from your customers. But I think what's important, a lesson learned here, is that what matters is not the tech, it's, are you solving a problem? So think about it from your career perspective in terms of what technology you should learn. Think about like a Venn. I think about like a Venn diagram. Like,
Mm,
combine it with what is the hot technology that companies and customers actually need that could solve a real problem today and in the future, and then what's interesting to you, and then try to find that happy medium and go for that. Don't try to just go for what everyone else is doing. Don't try to just go for a million different tech things. Like to your point, like resume hacking, like where you have every skill in the book, which, by the way, I need to clean up my LinkedIn profile because I have skills on there that I haven't touched in a long time. But, I think you bring up a really good point there of like, you really want to solve a problem. It's about impact, solving a problem. So I just touch on a little bit really quick here on my VMware side, my VMware journey. When I joined VMware, it was I actually was so excited because I thought I was going to be working on the big data stuff. Because I got Cloudera certified and all this stuff, and I'm like, all right, they hired me for big data. But what they actually hired me for was to go to the FBI and do this thing called vRealize Business. What? What is this vRealize Business? And so I had to learn P-SQL, I forget what it is now. I had to learn P-SQL and how to transform data Excel spreadsheets into IT cost visualizations in a stupid VMware product. I say stupid because they don't have it anymore, and it was really dumb, but it was very difficult, very painful for the customer. But instead of getting angry about that and being frustrated, and I was frustrated at first, I'll be honest. I realized, okay, I'm gonna do the best job I can. And then I realized there's other parts of VMware that I can learn and other people I can learn from. And so I quickly pivoted from this vRealize business guy to automation. And so I became one of the biggest experts in the federal practice on vRealize automation and orchestration and eventually networking security as well, but mostly on the automation side. And that ended up getting me promoted twice. I went from a senior consultant to a consulting architect to a staff architect. Um, and so, but what I focused on was that Venn diagram of like what what actually matters for the business and customers and what am I interested in. And so I focused on that, which was the automation piece. And so I learned Kubernetes, I learned Docker, I learned infrastructure as code, Salt Stack, and a little bit of Terraform and all those things. And by focusing on that, and actually, I'm gonna bring up a picture here real quick.
Okay.
Just really fast here. I got to do some really cool stuff. I got to go to all like these worldwide kick. This is me at VMware, but it really led to like by leaning in to making an impact. I got to meet like Pat Gelsinger, who was the
Oh,
CEO of VMware at the time. I got to meet um, Michael Dell as well. I got to do all sorts of cool stuff at VMware. I got to go to AWS reInvent twice because I really leaned into VMware Cloud and AWS at the time, which was super new. I was just like, I'm gonna go for where the impact is, and so I was really focused on outcomes. And you know, uh, just a big takeaway from my VMware side here. I think a big takeaway that you should think about as you want to break in big tech, there are three kind of categories to break things down in terms of impact. There's strategic, there's tactical, and technical.
I
And if
like
you
that.
want to have a big impact, you got to operate at all three. And you know this, Pat, especially when you go into tech sales, you definitely understand how to pivot between all three of those. And if you really want to have a big impact, you got to operate all three. Strategic is really outcome focused. It's really working backwards from problems and solving them at the business or mission level. Tactical is more about how you get it done. And technical is more about getting in the weeds of technically making something happen. And being able to like think about it in those three layers really unlocked it was a big unlock for me in my career because it helped me compartmentalize those things and like what skills, the soft skills to the technical skills. And so now I can go talk to a CEO, but I can also go talk to a data scientist and understand. It sounds simple, but being able to have that soft skill to be able to pivot on demand and be able to, have conversations at each of those levels and communicate what you need to communicate, I think is super
Yeah.
important. Um,
Yes, it's definitely a skill, like you said, like, being able to have, understand those different personas as well. Not to cut you off there, but yeah, just wanted to say that.
yeah. So, I know we probably have not a whole lot more time here, but I want to get into the next step of your career and then mine as well, which is Red Hat. I think Red Hat, right? And then
Yes,
AWS.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, do you want to talk about like what brought you to Red Hat? What was the interview process like? What did you learn from being a veteran and your past experience at Comcast and defense contracting that helped you or didn't help you in that Red Hat interview process? And, do you have any lessons learned there?
Oh yeah, great question. So yeah, I didn't mention this earlier, but Red Hat was actually one of my dream jobs. Like I had interviewed there a couple times before. I didn't get hired, unfortunately. But that brings me back to another point. The secret to success is to never give up. So I kept trying. And then finally, I was working at Comcast, and I had a good relationship with a recruiter, and they were hiring for Red Hat, and the rest was history there. And during the interview process, there was like several interviews. It was more so my previous interviews at Red Hat were a little more technical. Like, so there was multiple rounds. There was kind of like kind of the silly question sort of interview round too. And then there was like the hands-on portion round. Then I had to fly out and deliver a presentation in person about a real world use case that I worked on. But when I finally ended up getting hired at Red Hat, it was just multiple rounds of interviews with other solutions architects, partner account managers or account managers as well, and just kind of having a conversation. Throughout my career, I was always like super focused on tech. I wasn't so much focused on, what everything else that was going on. And that was like a huge takeaway for me. I learned that I had to develop those soft skills to be able to have, there's more than life than just tech per se, but, even though we're focused on tech here, but, being able to have those conversations was a huge takeaway for me from Red Hat. The interview process was pretty quick. It was just, mainly like 30 to 60-minute interviews, just, having a conversation, talking about use cases, and touching on different things I was skills that I was able to pick up from Comcast. Like while I was working on those business cases at Comcast, executives, they want to hear about the business value, the impact. They want to hear about, you know, OKRs, or, outcomes, how much money is this saving us versus, does it make sense to build this versus buy this? And that really helped me in my tech sales career because I had some experience with some, interfacing with a lot of executives at, Fortune 50 companies and so on and so on. And um, yeah, it was just, and then when I was at Red Hat, I was fortunate enough to get work on a lot of exciting use cases, work with a lot of exciting customers, partners as well. And, it's just going back to that, what I mentioned earlier about never turning down the opportunity, even though sometimes it may not seem like it's of that much importance or high value, but there's always a lesson learned or a takeaway. So I got a lot of exposure to different things when I was at Red Hat. So like modeling simulation, like think wargaming. That
Wow.
was huge. You know, wargaming was huge because you don't want to wait to game day to start practicing with wargaming and stuff. And the military spends a lot of time training, and they're always looking for innovative ways to do training. So wargaming was cool, being able to, not only do wargaming, but work on use cases around like weather and weather data, bringing that to the battlefield.
That's
That
awesome.
was pretty cool and exciting. Going to conferences, going to different events, manning the booths, sort of say, and talking to people about, the value prop of different technologies. And, as you move up in your career, like you said earlier, it becomes less tactical and more strategic and being able to wear those different hats when the situation calls for it, like when you're talking to different personas, while you're in tech sales, it's like you got to understand what they care about, the engineer or the individual contributor, you know those are the like more the folks that you normally geek out with. You're going to talk, you're going to get in the weeds with them, but when you're talking to executives, you want to talk about, outcomes, business value, impact. They like to hear certain things like, saving money, cost optimization. So I got to learn, really hone in on my sort of, I never really sold anything, as I like to say. I always try to listen to the customer, listen to, their use cases, their pain points. And, those were some of the key things I learned from Red Hat. Also, I felt like I really got to hone in on my presentation skills, my presenting skills. I
Yeah.
spoke in front of a lot of large audiences. While I was at Red Hat, did a lot of like hands-on, um, like not courses, but like engagements as well. So like, just being able to deliver, like you don't always have the support that you need. Sometimes you just got to be adaptable. You got to make things happen. Like, so, and when I was at Red Hat, I bought my first, sort of server, that I have installed at my house, and that's where I installed all the Red Hat software, really got some hands on, and that helped me because in some cases, like customers would buy software, and the last thing you want that software to be is shelfware. And I learned that from Comcast as
Oh
well.
yeah.
We had licenses of certain vendors, and the license was weeks away from expiring. We hadn't installed it yet. So, I wanted to make sure that, the customer success and, ensure customer success as well. And yeah, Red Hat was a very, I would say, key opportunity for me as well. Being able to just see the bigger picture, work with different customers, different that have different missions, different outcomes that they're looking for, and just having that flexibility. It goes back. One of the reasons I felt like I was able to do that because early on in my career, I wasn't afraid of a challenge. I wasn't afraid to learn new things. I try to adapt as quick as possible, and Red Hat is one of those places I felt like I was able to make a huge impact there.
Yeah, man, I love that. You're absolutely right, dude. Like that, VMware was that for me, with my first time making that impact. And I pivoted my skill set and my career so many times. And one of my mentor, and this is another lesson I think for everybody. You hear this a lot, but it's true. Find a mentor or two
Oh yeah.
that can take you to that next level. Yeah, you might have friends that are in the same job category as you or the same level. That's good, that's fine, but really find someone that's that at that next level. That could be your manager. It could be, an executive or someone under the company. Someone that's already done what you want to do or is where you want to be. You know, have them be your mentor. A lot of times, like myself and yourself, Pat, we love helping people out. I mentor people, as much as possible. I love it, just because it's about paying it forward. And so, find yourself a mentor that can help you upgrade your skills, your soft skills, especially, um, and taking that next level. For me at VMware, getting those promotions, how did I do that? I did it because I had a mentor. I bought my own server rack. I sold the whole VMware stack on it. Like I was the automation guy, but I was like, no, I'm going to install every piece of VMware software and be at least smart on it. And so I was able to figure it all out, go through those pain points, um, and take my skills, take my expertise to a whole new level. I got to go across all of the DoD, from Army Corps of Engineers to the FBI to the U.S. Treasury and all that stuff, and help them with VMware stuff. And I was still in professional services at that time, um, and to talk about the next level. So I want to talk about this. Is going to AWS for me, and then you talk about your next level, Pat, because like Red Hat was, and this is something to like be flexible in your career too, because it was my dream to go to Red Hat. VMware was not my top choice until I realized how amazing VMware was at the time. And VMware, I thought I would retire at VMware until Dell sold VMware to Broadcom. Um, and that's when I decided to leave. But long story short is during my time at VMware and I got exposed to VMware Cloud AWS, I realized I should have gotten on the cloud bandwagon a lot sooner. And AWS was awesome. And I actually interviewed at AWS 2 times throughout my time at VMware, and I failed every time. It wasn't until I met Trevor Spires, who was a VMware colleague of mine, and now he's at AWS, who helped me he was my mentor. He helped me take my game to the next level in that the AWS interviews were super hard. They were super hard in that they're very structured. But once you understand why AWS interviews the way they do, and a lot of big tech companies do this now, it's actually not that hard. What AWS expected, and the reason why, so let me backtrack. So I didn't pass the first two AWS interviews. And then when I passed the second one, I got hired as an L6, senior cloud consultant, or cloud developer actually, in professional services for national security. And so I went from not even being able to pass an L5 job interview to being able to pass the L6 with flying colors. I've been told that I got a unanimous hire decision, which is rare. And so what was the difference? The difference was that I actually put a lot of effort and thought and time into preparing for my interview process. So if you want to break into big tech, especially nowadays where it's so competitive, I would recommend that you think about your impact. What have you done? Not your team. What have you done? Write that down in a star format. So situation, task, action, result, or situation, task, action, impact. What was, things that you do, not just the technical things, but what's the impact to the customer? And the bigger your impact is to your customer or to the business or to your team, the more likely you are to get hired and the better roles that will open up to you in big tech. And so for me, it was about I opened up a Word document back in 2022 and I wrote down everything. And I did it in the star format. And I made it about what impact did I have. And so it was being able to tell those stories in the interview process that ultimately landed the role that I got at AWS. And AWS, I'll just say this too, it just blew my mind. It took me to that next level, well beyond VMware, in that I immediately got put on a team in professional services to learn Cloud Development Kit, CDK. I've never been a software developer. I've always been like a scripter, automation, but I had to learn like software development practices. So I got training in Agile, doing sprints. I led teams doing sprints at AWS to deliver things, statement of work. Um, and some of the biggest takeaways at AWS, I'll just, almost wrap this up and I'll get back to you, Pat,
Yeah.
is which ultimately led me where I'm at today. But I started off in consultant and I thought my VMware, by the way, I didn't have any AWS certifications. None.
Oh, really?
Um, None. Yeah. But what mattered was those stories. What mattered is impact. Because I had a big impact at VMware. I had a big, I was able to tell my stories. And that's ultimately what AWS cared about. They didn't care that I didn't have the certs, right? A lot of big tech companies, they look at culture and impact. And they look at, okay, well, we can train you on our software, right? That's often how they think. And so don't think you have to get every certification in the book. Focus more on impact, focus more on relationships. And so when I first got at AWS, I had to learn Cloud Development Kit and CDK, and that was awesome. That really opened my eyes up to the Agile framework. But honestly, what really took my career to the next level at AWS and after that was the leadership principles, which sounds cheesy, but their leadership principles, and they're famous at AWS for a reason, at Amazon, learn and be curious, right? These are themes that Pat and I have talked about this whole thing is like learn and be curious. Um, think big, right? Think big for your career. Be the CEO of your career. Think big for your customers. Um, Customer obsession. What does that really mean? Well, what that really means, if you want to break into big tech, well, how they think about it is, can you work backwards from the root cause or the root thing that customers need to solve? Customers often, like if it's in the defense sector, they care about mission, they care about capabilities, they care about mitigating risk. They don't care about your tool or your technology. They don't care how smart you are on Linux or something. They don't care. What they care about is, can you solve their problem? Can you reduce friction? So work backwards from that and ask questions. Ask a lot of questions.
I like that.
Um, yeah, you're right. And so on my AWS journey, I decided to take control of my career. I could have, the professional services was awesome, but I've been doing professional service for 9, 10 years and I wanted to break into tech sales. And so I reached out to a tech sales manager, Scott Reinfeld. He's amazing, like one of my favorite people of all time. And I told him, like, hey, this is what I want to do. And I got on the AI train early. I decided to learn AI ML. And then the chat GPT moment came out and I went all in on Gen AI. And I had, some adversity. I had some data scientists at AWS tell me privately that I didn't know what I was talking about. I'm not a PhD and that I should stop with the whole Gen AI stuff. This was early Gen AI days.
Wow.
And I said, that really hurt to hear that. But
Yeah.
I said, you know what? Screw you, basically, because I know natural language. I know Gen AI. I know these things are going to be big deals. And so I decided to pivot my entire career from automation and cloud and infrastructure to all in on AI ML and all in on Gen AI. And what happened is I got hired on I became a senior solutions architect on the technical sales role, and I made an immediate impact. Most SAs are focused on what's called a pod, a sales pod. And I actually immediately got to be across all the pods for a large, huge account because Gen AI was a rare skill set at the time. And so I got to have a big impact, bigger than any other L6 SA at the time on that team because I was focused on Gen AI and AI impacts everything. And so I took that and ran with that. And my boss, Scott Reinfeld, and my leadership and some others and Pana and all these folks, they really set me up for success there. And I ran with that and I became like the MCP guy. And just to show a couple pictures here on that really fast, you know,
Develop your brand. Yeah, I like that.
yeah, develop your brand. I got to do this. I got to speak at AWS Summit on an executive track about MCP and Gen AI for the mission.
Oh, wow.
Right? I got to speak in front of government leaders, right? And so I got to develop this brand on LinkedIn internally. I ended up leading a cohort called the Gen AI cohort, or rather Gen AI Center of Excellence across space and sensors for AWS National Security, which was like 12 solutions architects, brilliant people, super smart. And we got to work together on things like the School of Gen AI. We got to do all sorts of big impact things. I wrote one of the first white papers on MCP internally on that because I took the initiative, and
Wow.
I had so many amazing mentors. I didn't let that data scientist that was hating on me, drinking the haterade, stop me. Right? Am I the smartest person? Am I a PhD data scientist? No, but I don't have to be. Right? Because I focused on impact. How does this impact the mission? And that led to, oops, that's the wrong thing there. Sorry. Actually, that's the wrong thing too. Where'd it go? Oh yeah. So I got to do all sorts of stuff like go to reInvent, meet Raj, who was a principal architect at AWS. He's starting his own business now. And I just got to network and establish my brand. And so before I get into my final career move, where I'm at today, because Pat, I want to let you to focus on what your next step there is. That what I'm trying to say is that you are the CEO of your own career. Work backwards from customer problems. How can you solve them in unique ways and focus on focus on your brand and relationships? And so that's what I'd say there. And AWS was just a mind-blowing experience, and I would go back to AWS any day of the week. If the time was right. Just phenomenal people, phenomenal technology. But yeah, before I get into that next the phase I'm at now and how I got there, Pat, what was your next phase there?
Yeah, and before I jump into that, Adam, I just want to say one thing. So, like, you mentioned like, somebody told you couldn't do something. Basically, I want to reiterate that that's super important. I think that's a really key takeaway, a good nugget to have. Throughout my career, a lot of people told me I couldn't do things, but I didn't let that stop me. And you just got to keep trying. Like if you don't make the first interview, try again later on. And that's how you grow. It's like you don't have to necessarily go to school per se. You just, these days you can learn things without going to school. You just got to be able to, put in the work, and, that's going to be another key to success. But, yeah, so, just going back to like, sort of my next phase. So like, I had spent 4 years at Red Hat. I had a great run. I just felt like there wasn't anything left for me to accomplish goal wise there. I wish I had bought in all the like the little badges that I had from all the events that I went to. I mean, I never went to so many events in my life. And that's another thing that kind of helped me
Yeah, same here.
as well. It made me a differentiator from a solution architect perspective. I was also doing business development. I was kind of wearing that hat in a sense. I was going to these events, I was networking, I was getting business cards, I was, doing what it takes to help build that pipeline that we needed for opportunities. And then, so right now, or so current then I decided that I wanted to get back into the technical realm of things. I had been out of, a technical sort of a deep hands-on technical role, even though I was hands-on technical, tinkering around on my own time and stuff as well. But I wanted to see, what are folks doing in the industry? And that's when I decided, I wanted to work at Workday. And yeah, I'm currently a senior software engineer there, focused on reliability engineering. So supporting a lot of cool projects from Workday's platform or cloud platform. So like all the services that run on or that make up Workday behind the scenes, the core Workday as well, they run on this cloud platform. So learning, that's on Kubernetes as well. So just being able to, this my current job really helped me, get back into, what folks are doing out there, where the industry going, where's trends, pain points. Like for example, cybersecurity is a huge pain point. You would think these days that there's enough tools out there to solve some of these challenges, but it's never enough. You got to kind of, it's still a huge pain point from a vulnerability management perspective. And then just seeing the way that other folks are doing their sort of operations. I've learned, even though I've only been here 8 months or so, it almost feels like 8 years. It's just so much information, so many opportunities to learn different things. And it's not just Kubernetes as well. There's still some applications that run on like EC2 instances. So, seeing the latest and greatest things that are going on there, being able to dabble. We're primarily focused on AWS at the moment, but later on, there might be some opportunities for like GCP and other cloud providers out there or hyperscalers. And, just a lot of there's a lot of opportunities I feel like at my current role that help me grow. I get to work with different sets of people. They come from different companies. A lot of folks that come from Microsoft. I've never worked with anybody from Microsoft, so I love that. And that's another thing I want to mention too. So not staying in one place too long has helped me a lot. Is being able to grow and see, have even a bigger picture. And like you said, Adam, make a bigger impact because I haven't spent 20 years at one company. So I believe, doing that, it's not bad if you want to do that, but I believe after a while you become jaded. You become set in your ways of, what that particular company's doing. But, always having that fresh perspective helps. And, just switching things up. You can also always go back to a company. But sometimes you need to take a break, get away. And, that's kind of one of the
And
reasons
grow, and grow.
yeah, and grow. Excuse me.
Pat, if I may just comment on that, you're so right about that because, having spent like 8 plus years at VMware, I got super, efficient and good at the VMware software stack and just completely blind to everything else going
Mhm.
around in technology from AWS and OpenShift and all these things. So I was so focused on the VMware stack that when I came to AWS, I realized my head was in the sand, right?
Mhm.
Yes, I got promoted 2 times at VMware, and that was good, and I was on a trajectory. But had I just stayed at VMware for a long time, I wouldn't have been able to grow the way that I've grown, learn the things that I've learned. And so to your point, like I
Mhm.
just my mind was blown when I came to AWS how much I didn't know. Like, you know what I mean? Like I like in the machine learning terminology, I overfit to one vendor's technology stack. And I think that if you want to be, to your point, like if you want to be super valuable in technology, it's probably, unless you're at OpenAI or Anthropic or something, it's probably not good to just spend your whole, like half your career or something like that on one vendor's technology stack, because then you kind of lose the plot in terms of solving customer problems. Because it's like everything's a nail kind of problem. Like when I was at VMware,
Mhm.
VMware was the answer to everything, but that was so short sighted, right? Because anyway, yeah. So
Yeah,
go
yeah,
on. Sorry.
understand. Yeah, and just you touched on another thing there. Moving. Another takeaway for me at my current role is like the pace of things have changed rapidly with the introduction of AI in the workplaces. Like, there's no more, searching around on wikis. AI actually, and this is one of the reasons I'm super excited to be in this current role is like, seeing how the impact that generative AI has, AI in general has in terms of things like the mean time to the resolution, troubleshooting an issue. If you don't know something these days, or if you see an error, you can pop it in AI, and it can help you, accelerate fixing the issue, for example, sort of say. And it really, to me, it seems like, that's the direction things are heading. I see AI being more integrated into the workplace, and not so much. I know a lot of folks are scared that AI might replace them or something like that, but I don't think it's going to be like that. I think AI is just going to be a part of that everyday job, and it's only going to help you deliver more, make more of an impact, and also, accelerate the things that you're doing in terms of, these days, especially, it seems to be a common theme that companies want you to do a lot more with less, and AI is that way you can do that. You really don't have less. You actually, with AI, you have more. So it's, I got to really advocate to take advantage of learning AI, even if it's like as simple as like prompting, how to make your prompts more efficient and stuff like that. And, I got to dabble with a lot of use cases as well when I was at Red Hat around AI, different use cases with machine learning, data meshes, um, security as a service to, provide solutions for like automation. And that's really helped me in my current role because, I have such broad exposure to, from Red Hat to things that were going on from different customers to different use cases, real like mission critical stuff as well. And just going back to what we mentioned earlier, I'm really mission focused and mission driven, and I love the mission. That's what really drives me and, makes motivates me to get up in the morning and, do my best. It's like being part of that mission, knowing that's something that has to get done. And I take that away from the military, just, knowing there's a mission and having to make an impact on that mission is really drives me. And, in my current role is just, there's a lot of opportunity in terms of learning new things. Working with Kubernetes, some things have changed, from 10 years, a lot of things have changed from 10 years ago. So, and that brings me to another point. You got to constantly be learning new things, adapting along the way, and not embrace change. I know a lot of people are afraid of it. And I think that's one of the key things I got for the military too, is like things are going to change. You never stay at the same duty station for, longer than, depending on where you're at, like a year, 3 years, you're always moving around. And that really helped me be flexible in terms of like moving around different companies, being able to hit the ground running very quickly. And yeah, so, I see myself pivoting back into technical sales maybe later on. But right now, I'm really going to try to maximize or take advantage of the opportunity I have to be in this technical role, which is also sort of like a leadership role as well. We have a large team, a lot of different talents, a lot of different folks on the team with different skill sets, and it's being able to, I really love the culture at Workday. It's super collaborative, it's super supportive, and it's one of the best cultures I've seen so far throughout my career, and that's something I'm going to take with me when I go. All those lessons learned that I learned while I'm at my current company, and just apply those as applicable to the next place I'm at. Because, and it just goes back to, I have to continuously learn new things, and I love learning. So, one thing about technology is learning is continuous. I've seen folks that, when, things change rapidly in tech, and with AI, they're even changing even faster. And you got to be flexible. You got to be willing to adapt. Because I've seen folks that, they didn't want to stop learning Windows, even though, Windows, a lot of that stuff went to the cloud. So their jobs kind of went away. So, they're limited in terms of, unless they want to learn Linux or some new technology, they got to look for a new job. So, that's one of the, key things as well. So, yeah, there's a whole new landscape out there now, and I'm glad. Like, so every so often, I think, even though if I do go back to technical sales, I think I want to switch or pivot to a technical role again, just to get a refresh of what's going on, see different, get fresher perspectives as well. So yeah, I'll pause there.
Yeah, man, that's such great advice. I also like, the fact of never stop learning. And I think another lesson there is be open-minded. Just a quick story here. I absolutely loved my time at AWS. In fact, before I left, I got the top tier rating, which is the highest rating you can get. And my manager Scott Reinfeld gave that to me, and it was so rewarding and awesome to get that. And typically, what that could mean is you could get promoted to like L7 or something like that. But AWS is going through some tough times with all that. And so I was my dream to go to OpenAI or Anthropic. And I actually interviewed at OpenAI a couple times and Anthropic. And I believe OpenAI would have hired me if I would have lived in the DC area or San Francisco. And I'm so bummed that I'm not at OpenAI or Anthropic right now because I absolutely am obsessed with AI and I have real world experience building chatbots and agentic systems in mission systems, making big impact, getting super hands on there. But because I had an open mind, I actually got a different opportunity I did not see coming. And that was Hidden Layer. Hidden Layer is a AI security company startup, Series A, and they actually focus on securing AI itself. And honestly, at this point in my career, which was, mid last year, I was like, cybersecurity is boring to me at this point. Who wants to look at, I mean, for me, who wants to look at logs and look at seam tools? And like, that's so boring, man. Like I'm focused on Gen AI, man. To me, natural language is the new UI, right? I could deploy a EKS cluster using an MCP server now. That's crazy. That's so cool.
Yeah,
Um, I've been able to render like a 3D model in Blender using an MCP server. I don't know anything about Blender, right? So I'm all focused on AI, and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna give this hidden layer thing a chance. And man, I am glad I did because I had an open mind, even though I wanted to go to OpenAI or Anthropic or Google DeepMind or something like that. I didn't like get all butthurt or like too rigid in my thinking to not allow other opportunities to come into my life. And so I decided to have a conversation with Hidden Layer. And, this has been absolutely a game changer once again for my career because I'm only 8 months into Hidden Layer. I'm the only technical person in the federal business. So I'm helping build the federal business. So now I'm wearing multiple hats. Uh, I'm helping write RFIs, RFPs. I'm helping with product strategy. I'm helping with, go to market. I'm helping with research. I'm learning a whole new thing about AI security that's different than cybersecurity, and it's so new. And who knows what this leads to? Maybe we go Series B, maybe we IPO. Maybe I stay at Hidden Layer for the rest of my career. Maybe it leads to some other opportunity. But just as an example, because of that, learn and be curious. Because of that open mindedness, now, right? Just like you, Pat. I'll share a couple more pictures here, then what we can wrap up. But um, it led to this as one highlight. I'm only 8 months into Hidden Layer, and I got to go with my VP of Federal Sales to the White House, and I
oh
got
wow,
to go talk to agency CIOs and CISOs about how they should strategize and think about AI and cybersecurity. And like, what an amazing opportunity! And AWS is such a big machine that for me to go to the White House at AWS, I would have had to been promoted 2 or 3 times probably, right? To get that opportunity on behalf of AWS. But because I'm at a startup company at Hidden Layer, I'm able to get these unique opportunities to make a big impact.
that's
Um,
awesome.
right? And so, what I want to say about that is now at Hidden Layer, I am wearing multiple hats. It's stressful. It's a lot of work. But, I released a video on the ablation attack, removing internal safety guardrails on an LLM. I didn't know how to do that 8 months ago, but now I know how to do that, and that video has 1.4 million views. Like,
Wow,
right? So, long story short is here for those that are wanting to break into big tech. I'll say my 2 cents. You say your 2 cents, Pat, and then maybe talk about a little bit what's next for you and all this stuff, and we can share some resources. But I think to put a bow on it, so far in my career, am I the most successful person in the world? No. Could I have done things differently? Yes. I think my biggest lesson learned is I wish I would have put myself out there sooner. I wish I would have, you know, gone for more challenges sooner. I wish I would have had more confidence in myself. So have more confidence in yourself. Just because you're early in your career, or you're still a veteran, or you just got out and you think that you can't run with the big boys at these big tech companies, yes, you can. You just got to put in the effort, put in the work, learn and be curious, and work backwards from what kind of problems are these companies and customers trying to solve. And if you can fill a need, they're going to probably hire you. Um, and so, and be open minded, right? Like, so many times in my career, as I've said, my dream was to go to Red Hat. My dream was to go to Cloudera. My dream was to go to VMware, AWS, OpenAI, Anthropic. Sometimes you don't get to always do what you think you should do, but if you continue to build your brand, execute, ruthlessly prioritize, learn and be curious, good things should come your way, and just build relationships with people. This is a small industry. Even though tech is big, you're going to be in healthcare or defense or finance, fintech, wherever you are, that's a relatively small community. So be trustworthy, have an impact. That's kind of my 2 cents, and just continue to push forward. Pat, what are your thoughts? What are your, what's your advice to veterans, who are going to be newly minted veterans, and also those that are already vets?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I mean, you touched on a lot of great areas there. Yeah, I would say the biggest things or lessons learned was, it's sort of kind of how that I already knew was like, be adaptable, be flexible. Another big thing was like relationships. I had a buddy in the military, the one I was doing the blogs with. Like him and I used to debate actually about this topic, and I was like, no, I'm gonna have this so much. I'm gonna be so good at my job that folks are gonna have to hire me. I'm gonna be that technical, and I just strive to be the best I could be at that technology. But as I went around, went throughout my career, I learned the importance of relationships. Like it's not sometimes it's not what you know, is who you know. That's very important. That's a huge lesson learned that I would take away from Red Hat at least, and also and it's okay. Like one of I think a bad habit, but also kind of a good habit I picked up from the Marine Corps was, we could never say that you don't know something per se, but you'd had to figure it out. I kind of took that with me and put that in my toolbox as well. But I learned like it's okay. Or one of the challenges I had early in my career was in tech was, asking for help.
Yeah, that's
You
a
don't
good
have to
point.
always struggle or spin your wheels on
Be
something.
the hero.
Yeah, be the hero, sort of say, and it's okay not to know something, being vulnerable as well, and just communication. That's another big thing. It's just like being able to, you have to continuously communicate with folks, especially when you're in tech sales. You have to communicate, continuously communicate with your counterparts as well. Depending on who you're working with, and just developing those relationships. So for me, it was so more so on the soft skills side as well, and then another thing you touched on, Adam, was like, even though you didn't take the direction that you wanted to go, it's still a journey. You're still on a path to potentially get to where you're going. And, that's sort of how I felt in this current role that I'm in. I'm like, I didn't really want to do this per se, but, I had to go in it with an open mind and, approach it that way. And it's just look at the benefits of it, the overall benefits of it, like where, I'm learning new skills, I'm working with new people, different types of people, different products. So like I never worked on like I would say this application is more in the what you would call like the ERP side. So it's just like, so now I have, some of those skills. Like I touch so many different use cases throughout my career. Again, just going back to the bigger picture. So I worked on telecommunications use cases. I worked on DoD use cases, big data, healthcare, a wide range of just exposure to different use cases and customers, and just because I was willing to be adaptable and flexible, not, I didn't say that that's not my job, but sometimes you do have to put your foot down and advocate for yourself. But, but when it gets tough, I would say that's definitely, where the growth starts. And it's like, after being at so many places, I thought, like, one of the things, like, the reason I got in the military too was like, I got tired of having to constantly prove myself or start over, start from scratch. And then I learned, like, that never stops.
It
You're
doesn't.
constantly, you're gonna have to, just do it, and, I had to get past that. So that was a lesson learned. Like, I was just tired of proving myself at a certain point in my career. But then, it's just a continuous thing. I have a totally different mindset now. Now that I left Red Hat, I'm at Workday, and it's really, I think things are only going to get better, from here on. Like, I got a lot of things I'm trying to do, on the side here, and it's just all about that growth, and not making excuses. Even though, sometimes I work 10, 12-hour days, and I might feel tired, but it's just like, you got to keep pushing. You got to keep, pushing. And that's where the growth starts. But just remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So be careful not to burn yourself out. But yeah, it's just so many takeaways I could elaborate on there. But yeah,
Pat, man,
that's
I love what you said there about asking for help. I actually one of the early days at VMware, I got a little spot award, which is like a $50 gift card kind of thing, for asking for help. As stupid as that sounds, it's a lot of people, a lot of vet, because I worked with a lot of veterans. A lot of veterans don't ask for help. I was guilty of that for so long because, just like you, Pat, I felt like it's all on me, man. Like, I think like there's something to pull a thread there really quick. Also, in that communication, asking for help, but also, be like you said, being vulnerable. That's such a big deal. And then also, for a long time, I was also, because in the military, it's about we, it's about the team, about the unit, not about you. And I
yeah,
think that that took me a long time as well. Of like, it's okay to be about you. In that, when you go to interview and you try to break a big tech, don't say we or my team. They don't care about your team. They care about you. What have you done? And
exactly.
that was one of the reasons why I failed my AWS interviews initially, was because I was so, I don't know if it was humble. I don't know what the right word is. I felt maybe that military mindset of like, well, I didn't do it 100% alone. So I couldn't, with integrity, I couldn't say that I did that, because maybe I did 80% of it, but the team helped there too. And so
Yes,
I
sir.
got in this rut of like, I could never say, because you're always on a team, but you gotta, so anyway, I think those are some awesome lessons learned. Yeah. Any last words, Pat, before we like share some resources with folks?
Yeah, just real quick, I would say, so those of you, one of the things I saw a lot when I was getting out of the military, a lot of people are afraid. In the military, you're comfortable, you're going to get a paycheck. Most likely, it's hard to say these days sometimes, but at least back in the day,
Yeah.
first and 15th, you're going to get your paycheck. You're going to always have food. You're going to always have a house. I want to say, like, just come up with a plan and, start executing, and then just make sure that, you network, you talk to other people. If you're not having that much success, get some feedback, reach out to folks, get some feedback on your resume, some things you should change, or, try to get suggestions around some things you should change and stuff like that. But yeah, that's probably what I would, the biggest things I would want to hit on before we wrap up here.
Yeah, great points. Yeah, and really, for those watching and watching even after the live recording, Pat and I, like, we want to help you as veterans. We want to help you in your career, no matter where you're at in your journey. If you're at the same level as us or beyond us, or if you want to help, or if you're just getting started, you know, feel free to reach out. Right? Like, don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to communicate. Ping us on LinkedIn or comment on on this video. We'll read the comments, and if you want us to do more of these videos, Pat and I talked about this. We'd love to just continue talking about veterans in tech. This is just our starter video, intro video, where our journey. We'd love to talk to you about your journey. talk about other things in tech and, whatever else comes up. So with that, Pat, like we could share some resources too before really quick before we wrap up here.
Oh yeah, that'd be
Um,
great.
yeah, so I think this first one, so these are some resources that Pat, there's so many out there that Pat and I found that can help you as a veteran. This is DoD SkillBridge. It's a official military website that helps you bridge the gap in skills. So if you're not in a tech role in the military right now and you want to get into tech, this might be a good resource for you. And this is all in the description too. Pat, do you have any thoughts on on that?
Yeah, Skills Bridge seems popular these days. I worked at a couple of places that had some Skills Bridge folks there. So yeah, it's all about getting your foot in the door. I think Skills Bridge is a great way to do that as well. And just taking advantage of the resources out there. There's a lot more resources these days that are available to you. I think it's about just knowing what those resources are and just tapping into them. Really, try to leverage as much as you can in terms of resources that are available to you, like SkillsBridge.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm partial to this one, AWS for veterans. If you're curious about AWS in particular, reach out to me. I have a lot of friends that are at AWS still. Some hiring managers, some of them volunteer for veterans at AWS. So look into this and reach out to me or other AWS folks if you're curious about AWS specific skills or you want to break into AWS. I think Pat, you mentioned before this that there's a Red Hat one too, I think, or something along those lines.
Oh yeah, there might be something out there. I know there's like if there's nothing like veteran specific out there per se, but there might be something like free resource wise that you could tap into, like what do you want to call those? Like workshops that you can do on demand and stuff like that. And I'll try to find some of those links and post it or make a comment later on it.
Sweet. Another one, hiring our heroes corporate fellowship program. I'm not really too familiar with this one, but this is one that might be good to look into. What do you think, Pat?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like I said, you want to take advantage of every resource that you can, and that it makes sense. And like I said, there's a lot of stuff out there, and in terms of like free training and stuff like that, like you just gotta, take advantage of it. Is the first step, I would say.
Yeah. Another one, vets in tech. This is another one I have not personally had experience with this, but this might be a good resource.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure.
And these last two, I'm partial to. I think you are too, Pat. As AI, Pat and I talked about this, and Pat, feel free to chime in. But I think that no matter what you decide to do in technology, whether it's behind the scenes, professional services, SRE, software development, sales, you have to incorporate AI into it. If you want to break into big tech, without question. One of the things before I left AWS, AWS is an infrastructure cloud company, right? But the CEO, Matt Garman of AWS, said internally last year that AWS is now an AI company. So if you think about what that means, everyone must do AI. So you've got to get comfortable with it and be comfortable with it more than just the Chat GPT experience. Build something with it. So OpenAI has this free year of ChatGPT Plus for veterans.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and then this other one, Anthropic Academy. These are free. At least most of them are free. If you want to really get in the weeds of building with AI, to me, this is one of my favorite resources. The Anthropic Academy. Like, if you want to build MCP servers, agent things, like this is a fantastic resource. And one other tip that I'd like to share before we wrap up, and maybe you have one too, Pat.
Mhm.
Early on, one of my favorite things when ChatGPT came out, they had long-term memory, and they also had the voice mode. Years ago, I think back in 2023 when GPT-4 came out, but I was still learning. I had learned AI/ML first, and early on, and then I was all in the Gen AI, and it was so new. And I was learning, like, I remember I wanted to learn about the Mamba architecture, which is a particular architecture for Gen AI. And I was reading some of the papers, and I was, man, this is hard. This is like I'm not a data scientist necessarily, and some of the stuff I was like kind of confused by. And so what I did was I leveraged AI to learn. I uploaded some white papers to ChatGPT. I turned on the voice mode and I said, "You are my mentor. You are an expert. Let's talk about this white paper, or let's talk about this technology and help me understand it," as if I'm talking to a professor or a mentor. And, that is such a powerful way, I feel like, to learn nowadays. So leverage AI to help you learn a new skill. Whether it's hands-on, giving you examples, or just asking questions, clarifying questions, explain it to me like I'm 5 years old. Uh, Pat, do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, I'm with you on that. It's like leverage AI as much as possible. I mean, it's a game changer, in terms of being able to pick up new skills, learn new things. It really helps accelerate the learning stuff. And then another tool I like to use is Notebook LM. Like
Oh,
I like to
yes.
just throw different documents in there, and I did this a lot when I was at Red Hat. Like when I was trying to learn stuff, I learned from one of my mentors is you know even though you're not at home or in front of your computer, you throw something at Notebook LM, you could just turn it into like a voice conversation and listen to it while you drive down the street. And you can be like just learning, learning continuously that way. So Notebook LM is probably one of the key resources I use for um, when I'm trying to learn something new or digest a lot of content, or learn something on just short notice as well. Like sometimes you just got to, like I said, you got to be adaptable, and you don't have weeks or months to get up to speed. And Notebook LM, like the tools that Adam mentioned as well, ChatGPT, Anthropic, or Claude, all those tools are great as well. And get familiar with just you can stick to one tool, but try them all out. You may get different results. I know for me personally, I get different results or that I like for different tools, but just try to take advantage of them. Start there. So like when you're learning something, start with ChatGPT or Claude, and just be like, come up with a training plan, a curriculum that you can kind of follow and help learn what you want to learn. In terms of your goals there. So yeah, that's what I would say. In terms of that.
Awesome. Yeah, Notebook LM, man, that's a great one. Totally forgot about that. That's a fantastic tool, and it's so amazing what you can do with that too. Um, yeah. Well, I think that wraps it up. Pat, thank you so much for talking to me about this. Like your journey is incredible. Um,
Yeah,
and
my
there's
pleasure,
no, and I think for those out there listening, watching, just remember, it's not the journey is not a straight line. It's full of bends, curves, and ups and downs, and you just got to persevere and network. And so reach out to us, Pat. You are a great American, sir, and a great patriot. And thank you so much for your service and sharing your stories.
Yeah, my pleasure, Adam, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of this, and just connecting with me. And I'm super excited and passionate about this topic. So yeah, I look forward to doing more of these in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, if you guys out there, leave a comment if you want Pat and I to dive deep into any certain subject, Kubernetes, agents, AI security, whatever. Just let us know. We'd love to talk about it, and we can make this interactive too.
Yeah, and if you have any specific challenges that you would like us to explore, throw those out there as well. Like such as like translating your experience, choosing the right career paths, getting interviews and so on. Just throw some comments in the chat there, and we'll be happy to explore those later on.
Awesome. Thanks, Pat. Appreciate it. Thanks everybody for watching. Talk to you guys later.
All right, have a good one.